Hi, I'm Leanne from BatLadyHerbals, and welcome to my video. Today I wanted to share with you a herb that is not actually a plant. Now, if any of you have watched some of my previous videos, you might have heard me saying that I need to up my fungus game, up my mushroom game, things like that. And one of my absolute favorite medicinal herbs is actually technically a fungus, and that is Usnea. Now, down here in the south, Usnea does not grow quite as big as it does up north, and it's a very slow grower. So, I'll teach you a little bit of how to identify it. Now, if you see, it's kind of a seafoam green color, and it's got all these little branches, but if you break it open, inside there is a core, and it's a little dry, so it's not as stretchy as it could be. But that little yellowish white core right there is how you can tell this is indeed Usnea, and not one of the other mosses or lichen that we have that grow here. Now, lichen are technically in the fungal kingdom, but really what they are is they're a symbiotic community. That little core, that's how you identify Usnea, well, that's the fungus inside of it. And outside of it, that little seafoam green stuff that had all the branches, that's actually an algae or cyanobacteria, or a combination of both, depending on the species. So what they do, since the fungus cannot photosynthesize, it actually kind of lives together with the algae, which can photosynthesize, and they basically share and exchange nutrients, and that's how they can grow in places where they normally wouldn't be able to grow. So, like I said, Usnea is a very slow grower. If you want to harvest it in the wild, it's usually recommended not to harvest directly from the trees or the plants that it's growing on, just to give it time to grow. Luckily, it likes to grow on limbs, which tend to get blown off in storms. So your best bet for getting a good harvest and harvesting in a way that doesn't hurt the plant is actually to look for windfall branches, branches that were knocked off the trees by the wind in a storm. So here in Florida, I would recommend going after a hurricane or after a summer shower, somewhere where there was lots of wind to knock down the Usnea. One of the common names for this plant is actually old man's beard, and that comes from the way that it grows. As you can see on this one, it kind of hangs down. It looks kind of fluffy and hairy like a beard, and it's kind of got like a grayish green color. Now, here in the south, it doesn't really form as long or as fluffy of a mat as it does up in the north, but in the north you can find it just hanging from trees like we have Spanish moss down here, and so that's why people thought it resembled an old man's beard, and that's where the common name comes from. Now, there are over 600 species worldwide, and most of these are used interchangeably in medicine. Now, it is technically edible, but it is extremely bitter, and if you don't prepare it properly, those bitter properties can upset your stomach a little bit. So if you wanted to try and eat it, if you like the bitter stuff, it might be worth it for you. Most people don't consider the work you put into it to make it edible worth it. But those bitter properties are part of why it's so useful for us, because we can tincture it and make a bitter tincture to help with our digestive system. Now, as well as being a good bitter herb which helps to stimulate bile production, it also helps to balance out the bacteria in our system, which could lead to a urinary tract infection or other kinds of things like that. You see, Usnea is a very potent antibiotic and antifungal, but it's one that doesn't really attack the beneficial bacteria that live inside. It really only goes for those more harmful things like Candida, which is the most common yeast that causes yeast infections and urinary tract infections. So the first recorded use of Usnea in medicine is actually from traditional Chinese medicine back in 101 BCE. So while this herb isn't really used commonly today in TCM, it was actually used in TCM under the name of Song Lao. Now, Song Lao is used to help clear heat, to move dampness, and to release toxicity. And it has special affinity for the skin, the lungs, and the kidneys. Now, with all this in mind, it's been used for so many uses in traditional Chinese medicine. Among them, wound care, snake bites, and a lot of the same things that we use it today in Western herbalism. Now, in Western herbalism, it's considered bitter, dry, and cooling. So, from that comes the idea that it is a great herb for your lungs and your urinary tract. So in addition to help being a preventative of a urinary tract infection, it also helps your urinary tract run a little bit smoother. It's also really good for the lungs, helps clear up lung congestion, and helps to get rid of any upper respiratory infections that you might have, such as bronchitis. And one of the interesting things about that is if you look at it closely, it kind of resembles the little capillaries and stuff in your lungs. And that's one of the ways that ancient people would think to start using herbs, is when they saw something that resembled something, that's the first thing they would try it on. Oftentimes they were right. Another thing that it resembles is it kind of resembles the cloths of a bandage. And that's where we come to probably the most well-known use for this herb. In World War I and II, it was actually used as a field dressing, which is where a soldier would be injured and a medic or someone would come and grab a bunch of Usnea and use it to pack the wound to help prevent it from bleeding. Well, one of the amazing uses of this herb is as a styptic, which means that it actually does help stop bleeding to a certain extent. But it's also extremely beneficial for wounds because of the antibacterial and antifungal properties as well. It also helps to stimulate some healing of the wounds a little bit faster. Another first aid use for this is it actually helps to draw out toxins. It's what we consider a drawing herb. In addition to toxins, it can draw out actual physical objects. So if you have a splinter that's a little too deep, or if you have a bee sting or something else that gets stuck in your skin and is causing you some irritation, if you use Usnea, basically you make a spit pulse, just put it on there and let it sit for about 20 to 30 minutes. It'll help to draw that out of your skin so that your skin can start healing itself. And it does the same thing with poisons, toxins. So if you have something like a spot of infection on your skin, then you can use Usnea on that as well, and it'll help to draw out that toxin so that your body can heal. To that same effect, it's also a traditional herb to use for snake bites because it will help to draw out the venom. So it's a great herb to know when you're hiking, especially since it can be found all in the northern hemisphere. And that way, if you hurt yourself or if you encounter one of our fanged friends in a not so friendly way, you might be able to help pull out any venom or at least start the process, which will give you extra time to get to a hospital. Now, one other thing this herb is really amazing for is it's an immunostimulator. That means that if you take this herb on a fairly regular basis, it's going to help improve your immune function. But with any immunostimulator, you want to be careful of how long you take it. While Usnea is considered safe, even in the long term for most situations, you don't want to overstimulate your immune system, especially if you're one of those people that has an autoimmune condition. Overstimulating the immune system can cause some pretty drastic side effects. Although Usnea is not usually one of the herbs that we know does this very actively. It's a very gentle immune stimulator. It's still something to keep an eye on if you are a person that has an autoimmune condition. Now, every herb has its cautions, indications, and warnings. Usnea is considered fairly safe for most people. Some people do have an allergy to this herb, and so the first time you encounter it or the first time you try it, you do want to be very careful with it just in case you're one of those people. However, unless you have an allergy, it's pretty much safe for everyone, even over long-term use. Now, there are some warnings that you typically find with this herb because of one of the constituents in it, usneic acid. This chemical was an ingredient in one of those miracle weight loss drugs several years back, and people were abusing this drug and using this in very dangerous ways. And it was determined that usneic acid was the cause of a lot of problems with the overuse of this drug. And so the drug was pulled off the market, and there's now warnings everywhere about usneic acid. However, if you use the plant as a whole, there's not enough usneic acid to really cause a problem. It's really just when you extract that single chemical and use it in a much greater concentration than you would ever find in the natural plant. And of course, anytime there's anything associated with one of those miracle weight loss drugs, you have to be a little cautious because you really don't know how well those are going to work for you. So thank you for joining me today. Once again, I'm Leanne from BatLadyHerbals. If you want to read more about this plant, I have posted a little bit more information on my blog. The link will be down below. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, consider subscribing, and hit that notification bell so that you'll be aware of any other videos I post in the future. Now, I also have a Teespring shop where you can find all kinds of designs geared towards promoting hiking, getting out in the natural world, and learning about herbs here in Florida. And feel free to go on there, shop around, and let me know what you think. Now, if you really enjoy what I do and want to support this channel, feel free to find me on Patreon and become a patron. Now, if you want me to come over and help you find some of nature's more interesting plants in your backyard, I do something called backyard tours. Feel free to contact me. My information will be down below on that. Now, don't forget that we do have a comment section down here, and I love hearing from you guys. So feel free to write comments, ask questions. I'll do my best to answer them as soon as I can. And thank you again for joining me today. Have a wonderful day.